All right, I'm very glad to be joined today on Bad Faith once again by Anya Parampil. You know her as a journalist at The Gray Zone and also the author of Corporate Coup. Welcome back, Anya.
Nice to see you, Brianna.
It's always such a pleasure. So I have to, confess to the audience that, as they're well aware, this news cycle has been absolutely extraordinary. I feel like I've been saying that for weeks, but somehow every week seems to top itself. I reached out to you maybe a little over a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, to talk about Venezuela. And it feels like the world has reinvented itself, even within the last 4 days or so. As we're recording this, we're just a few days out from the ICE killing, the most recent ICE killing in Minneapolis, Minnesota. This one's somehow even more obviously unjustified. I mean, it's hard to say that because because Renee Good's murder was also so obviously a point blank assassination. But in that context, you saw the conservative media sort of spitting this idea that she had tried to hit the ICE officer with the car. This time around, it feels like the pretexts are completely out of the window. Right. There's this effort to say Alex Preddy, because he had a gun that made shooting him justified, but the gun was out of his possession by the time he was shot. There were like 6 rounds fired into him after his body was still and lifeless on the ground. Um, the, you know, by this point, most listeners will have been following the sort of forensic accounts of what's been happening day by day. So I don't want to get overly bogged down in that. But I do feel, since this is the first episode that's come out since that happened, or that I've recorded since that happened, that I at least have to take a moment to, and I want to take a moment to acknowledge the gravity of where we seem to have arrived in this country. And so we are still going to obviously talk about Venezuela in this episode. But I do wonder, as someone who has a sort of international approach, and in the middle of these conversations that the left has been having about imperial boomerang and the inevitability of this kind of authoritarian violence happening in the United States after, for over 2 years, the United States has been largely indifferent to and has been facilitating a genocide in Gaza. And on the heels of the abduction of Maduro from Venezuela and the complete and total disregard of international law and the claims that we're going to, you know, uh, colonize Greenland and on and on and on, how you're thinking about this latest moment of authoritarian overreach in the United States and the broader context of the internationalism that you deal with.
It definitely feels as if we're experiencing to some level the Israelification of America through ICE. We know that ICE has an office in Tel Aviv, which is very bizarre for a sovereign American institution. Why would they need an office that has to do with our borders and our customs enforcement in a foreign country? It's not even something connected to the military or something international. It's literally about our borders. So why is there an office in Israel? I don't know. Why does ICE have contracts with Palantir and other Israel-aligned technology software companies, AI companies run by American Zionists, Alex Karp, that facilitated the mass killing in Gaza? That it was Palantir's facial recognition technology that made the assassinations of high-profile Palestinians in Gaza possible. And that same technology is what ICE uses to spy on Americans. And while on the face of it, this is all about immigration and ICE, I think that that's actually an issue that has now become a lever or a flashpoint, an issue that is now being exploited to just cause civil unrest, period, in the country. Because as if we're looking at for example, where ICE is even operating or where most of ICE deportations have been carried out or since Trump came into office, it's in Texas, it's in the South. And yet there's just something about Minnesota where even under Trump 1, it was this hotbed of confrontation between the public and the state. it's bizarre to me that George Floyd, Renee Good, and Alex Pretty were all killed within pretty much a 10-mile or a 10-minute radius in Minnesota, and that we're now once again seeing intense unrest in the streets. And it felt as if through this ICE policy, Trump was hoping, or the Stephen Millers, or Stephen Miller really, in the Trump administration, were trying to stoke some sort of confrontation between the public and the police, or in ICE in this case, and that it didn't work out for them really the way that they planned. I think it backfired, especially with the Alex Pretty killing, because he was armed in a way that was legal. It's an open carry state. And I even saw some figures in the Trump movement start to say that this had gone too far, because even Kyle Rittenhouse said, this is your right to carry a gun, and to even freedom to assembly is a right here in the United States. But it feels as if they've gone too far now. I think, Trump has fired the head of ICE that was in Minnesota, and are trying to, make him the fall guy. And hopefully, I would hope from here de-escalate, because what I don't want this to turn into is some sort of civil war. I mean, I don't like a scenario where there are armed protesters and armed forces like ICE clashing in the street. I think that's a recipe for disaster.
Was it appropriate for the ICE agent to push that gentleman onto the ground in the middle of the street into oncoming traffic? I mean, you see a city bus that has to come to a very quick stop to avoid running the man over. DHS did not respond to CNN's request for comment on that incident. And then there's this clip from St. Louis Park, Minnesota. That's a suburb just west of Minneapolis, where a driver says they began recording after witnessing a car crash between an ICE vehicle and another car.
Shame on you.
Listen, have y'all not learned from the past couple of days? Have you not learned?
Learned what? What's our lesson here? What do you want us to learn?
Following federal agents.
Give me my phone back. No, you can't take my... Shame on you.
DHS tells CNN that they told the woman multiple times to move her car and that she could film across the street. That ICE agent's strong objection, let's call it, to being filmed is something we've seen in several other videos, including this one from Portland, Maine. That's the latest state to receive this ICE enforcement surge.
It's not illegal to record.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing.
Yeah. Why are you taking my information down?
Because we have a nice little database.
Oh, good.
And now you're considered a domestic terrorist. So
We're videotaping you? Are you crazy?
We have a nice little database, and now you're considered a domestic terrorist. The officer tells the American citizen for using her phone to record ICE agents as they go about their enforcement in public, which is protected by the Constitution.
And so I hope that that because of the fact that this is kind of maybe backfired on Trump, that ICE steps back and that things can calm down in Minnesota, and that the country can kind of move forward and look to have some sort of justice for the people that have been killed. And I wish that there would be a candidate that would run on some sort of national reconciliation or like de-escalation. Like we need group therapy as a country or something, because I worry that the Democrats will just continue to not be honest on the issue of immigration, and use it as an issue to just say like, oh, this is how we're going to defeat the Republicans, is just by playing this one issue again and again, and that the Republicans or the Trump camp gets more and more violent and escalatory. I wish that there was someone that could bridge the two sides and say, how can we move forward as a full
what does that look like? Because an interesting dynamic has emerged where Democrats, let's say liberal Democrats, have, I think, correctly had an emotional and like logical response to seeing white American millennials getting killed in the street when they are not behaving violently. Alex Pretty specifically was intervening on behalf of a woman who had been violently pushed to the ground by ICE for observing ICE, whatever they want to call it, activities in their own neighborhood. people who are filming, which is their constitutional right, people who are expressing their First Amendment rights, their Second Amendment rights, are being violently abused in these ways. And Trump's and the Republican Party's favorability on these issues is tanking as a consequence of the outrageous, even to many Republicans, behavior of these ICE officials. So yes, there are people who are sort of capitalizing, let's say Gavin Newsom. I saw a video where Chuck Schumer said, fuck, in a really aggressive way, as though like that is a sort of a reflection of his resistance power. Like, you know, sort of capitalizing on public outrage in this moment. The question is to do what? So many on the left have pointed out that there's this government funding potential showdown that's going to happen on Friday, where folks are trying to push Democrats to use this moment as a moment for accountability and to not support any additional funding for ICE and to force a government shutdown until potentially ICE is abolished. And you've seen a lot of the moderate Democrats, Chuck Schumer's and Hakeem Jeffries, decline to support an abolishment of ICE and instead sort of argue that they are going to hold the line over a number of issues that are already laws, right? So Senate Democrats are saying they'll hold the line on DHS ICE reforms that include that DHS must cooperate with state probes, that CPB stays at the actual borders, that they have warrants for arrests, that the officers have visible IDs and body cams, that ICE is out of churches and schools, that they not wear face masks, and have limited to use of force standards. But as Adam Johnson from Citations Needed podcast, who does a lot of really important media criticism and other work, pointed out that these quote unquote reforms are already in place. You're already supposed to have a warrant or they're unenforceable. So these are things that are already supposed to happen. And they're not happening because Democrats have no way to control or enforce this behavior. But there are these sort of like symbolic gestures of resistance. I don't know if you also saw video. There was a viral video going around of Tim Walz being interviewed, again, being pressed on this question of what he's actually willing to do as governor of the state of Minnesota, where he gives a very milquetoast response, right?
Look, I don't agree with Tom Homan's philosophy on things, but I do understand that he is law enforcement and he understands right from wrong. And he knows, I mean, no matter how much they were trying to gaslight us, the layman on the street said, I don't really think it's good policing to run around and throw canisters and kick people down and think that's probably not a good idea.
So I agree with you that there's a sort of performativity about the liberal concern where they're willing to capitalize on the outrage. At the same time, conservatives, including Elon Musk, have rightly pointed out that Obama put in place or continued or shepherded forward a lot of the policies and funding, and the outrages and overreaches, including kids in cages and child separation and all of these kinds of things, happened, originated, or were continued under his administration, and that the liberal response is in bad faith. And as a leftist, it's hard because you're sitting here and it's like, I don't quote unquote agree with Elon Musk. I'm not saying it for the same reason he's saying it, but I do have an interest in pointing out the performativity of the liberal Democrat approach. And I share your concern that I don't have to believe that there will be any kind of productive resolution of the underlying authoritarian creep, because it has in fact been fostered by Democrats and Republicans alike. So I do wonder, from your perspective, what you would like to see, including from potential left candidates or independent candidates who are all trying to use this moment to stake a claim for 2028 or for midterms.
It's challenging because really the reason that I think this is such a difficult issue for the Democrats to play is that Trump basically won because people did vote on the issue of immigration. That was when people were polled about why they went and voted for Trump. It was because Trump wanted to do this. And Democrats pretty much will never acknowledge that people do have an issue with mass migration and unfettered, regulated, illegal migration at the border. and the record numbers that happened that we saw of people coming in under Biden, people voted for Trump. And that's not to say that it's good. It's just to say that that's what happened. It was a reaction to something real that happened. And so the Democrats lose on this issue if they don't address the issue of borders and how they can reform the legal immigration system and enforce it, because they haven't gained a reputation for doing that in recent years. And I think that a real left candidate should have to speak about the issue of borders and how workers are affected by mass migration. But it's a very difficult conversation, not one that I
well,
I have solutions for, but I can definitely say that.
On that. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. You'll definitely say that.
I can just say that my issues with like covering South America, for example, we wouldn't have had so much mass migration from a country like Venezuela if not for the policies of our government that I covered in my book, or that we've discussed on this show, whether it's the sanctions and now we can talk about what's happening now because life might improve there. But I would at least start with that, because it's kind of a chicken before the egg scenario. We don't have to encourage mass migration to our border to begin with through our destructive policies. But when we do have mass migration, 6 or 8 million people coming over in 4 years, there's unfortunately a reaction to that. And now it's playing out on another level. It's not like we're seeing it. We're not seeing it as direct confrontations between migrants and people that oppose their presence in the country. We're seeing confrontations between Americans who defend their right or want them to be in the country or don't want ICE intervening in the situation, and armed federal officers. So it's not good for the overall security of the country.
Yeah, I think that's a really good segue that you set me up perfectly for. And I have to take a slight segue before we actually get to that segue. So I detour. I do want to validate. I want to put some specifics on these immigration numbers. So this is from a recent Reuters poll. Just 39% of Americans approve of the job Trump is doing on immigration, down from 41% just earlier this month, while 53% disapprove. Immigration was a brighter spot for Trump's popularity in the weeks following his January inauguration. In February, 50% approved and 41% disapproved. So to your point, Anya, I think it's indisputable. I think it's right that a lot of folks were mobilized by immigration. I do have a hot take on this one. And I should probably do a radar on this. But I have long been frustrated by the Democratic Party's choice to follow polls as opposed to create new realities. So you're seeing this even in the way that Republicans are doubling down on ICE right now. We'll see if this is like the Rubicon that they shouldn't have crossed, like this is the tipping point where this strategy no longer works. But there's a kind of unapologetic willingness for the Republicans to manifest their own polling reality, to move the Overton window and to encroach in political territory that's not already popular. So they created immigration as an issue. They looked around, they saw some immigration spikes happening under the Biden administration, and they made it an issue. The same way that, frankly, they made the economy an issue under Biden. They're not making something out of nothing, but they are using their platform to change what the priorities of Americans are. And Democrats tend to follow Republicans and chase them as though they can then prove to the public that they are more to the right than the Republicans who have created this issue in their own image. And that's exactly what happened around immigration before the 2024 election, where Kamala and Biden tried to run on, we have even more right-wing immigration policy than the conservatives, which proved to only alienate the liberal base and do absolutely nothing to persuade conservatives, who rightly asked the question, well, if you cared so much about these immigration policies, if you supported them in good faith, why didn't you do them earlier in the Biden administration? And that's not me endorsing those policies, but logically speaking, that's obviously the way a voter would respond to this kind of like ninth inning choice to aid Republican policies. And they do this all over the board with all kinds of cultural issues. They decided that, to run to the right on trans issues and all these other kinds of things. And regardless of what you think about it, I would argue that the better strategy would be to change the conversation to something that is more advantageous to you, and to try to change the voters' priorities. And I think you see that with Zoran. It's not just an affordability message. It's him holding himself out as obviously having this singular priority that is also in line with the interest of the people of New York means that whenever anybody tries to knock him off his footing into another issue area, they're the ones that seem to be off topic and prevaricating and trying to distract from this thing that is obviously a priority for people of New York and all over the country, but, you know, New Yorkers in Zoran in particular. And similarly, I think that what's happening now, and I think that Democrats shouldn't get confused by this, Democrats are increasingly popular on immigration, not because they've just like kind of changed their minds, and the public broadly, not because they just changed their minds on immigration, but because human events have forced the conversation to your Second Amendment rights, your First Amendment speech rights, your right to, you know, liberty and to be in your house without being subject to a warrantless arrest. And that is something that Americans almost unanimously agree should be their fundamental constitutional rights. It's not just quote unquote immigration and border control. I don't even know that people's attitudes about that have really changed. And if Democrats allow the conversation to get back to that, without realizing that what has happened to their advantage is refocusing the conversation to areas that are advantageous to them. And to continue to do that by, say, I don't know, supporting something like universal health care, focusing on the wealth tax that Ro Khanna is trying to fight for out in the West, on the West Coast in Silicon Valley, then they can continue to benefit from positive news cycles where Republicans look like they're the ones distracting and trying to pivot to issues that are less salient to people's lives. Sorry, I said a lot there, but this has been a bit of a bugaboo of mine for a while.
I get what you're saying. I think the issue is that the Democrats maybe don't want to act on those issues in good faith, and they don't
100%,
always have a leg.
100%.
They don't always have a leg. They don't have a leg to stand on when it comes to free speech. And I don't think they're going to start going down the path of defending the Second Amendment anytime soon.
100%. I mean, some people, I don't know. I've seen a lot of, I mean, this is niche, but, you know, a lot of Black Americans who are looking back to the history of gun reform in California, where it was because the Black Panthers protesting at City Hall armed is why California under Reagan got the strictest gun laws in the country. I mean, people are pointing out this hypocrisy. I mean, I think the broader question is whether this hypocrisy will actually, if it's meaningful, if it causes any real realignment, or if what we've been seeing under, you know, 8 year, you know, the 2 Trump terms, which is that people are, many voters seem to be forming their political identity around what it means to be sort of MAGA and loyal to Trump as a human being in a sort of identity politicsy way, as opposed to their substantive values. If any of that is going to shift because of what's going on. The last thing I want to just touch on, I mean, I just have to say out loud the story. I just have to say them. We don't have to talk about them. You mentioned the focus on Minneapolis, why this stuff keeps happening there. It is worth pointing out that the Trump administration has made an enemy of Minneapolis, has made an enemy of Ilhan Omar, has made an enemy of Somalis in particular, as their way to, I think, justify violence against certain groups. We can't not think of the what's his name? Norman Niemöller poem. You know, first they came for the communists and I wasn't a communist and I didn't care. Then they came for the Jews and I wasn't Jewish and I didn't care. And then they came for me and there was no one left to care for me. It does feel like they're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs. All of this has been part of an effort to dehumanize certain segments of the population so that they can expand who it is appropriate to do violence against. And now we're at a tipping point because, you know, middle-class, white, peaceable Americans are getting killed. But that started a long time before that. So it would be remiss not to acknowledge the way that Minneapolis has been a target of ICE, the focus on this child care fraud story as a way to dehumanize and vilify Somalis as a group. And now, just last night as we're recording this, Ilhan Omar was attacked at a town hall by a man who sprayed some kind of substance on her. She didn't back down. She very notably seemed to kind of crank her fist up like she was about to go on a counterattack before people separated them and got him out of the room. But it's hard to see this as anything other than an escalation. Donald Trump was asked about this. He basically says, I haven't heard of the story. And of course, isn't going to take any accountability for that. And on top of that, we also have the new TikTok changing of hands. It's come under American leadership and ownership. It's now part of the great Ellison empire. And the immediate consequence seems to have been a repression of stories about Minnesota protests against ICE, and of course, suppression of any and all advocacy for Palestine and the pushing of pro-Zionist TikToks that no one seems to be asking for. I'm giving you an opportunity to comment on any or all of that before we move on to Venezuela.
That's a lot, but I would just say one of the issues with Ellison taking over TikTok is, yeah, it's American, but it's more Zionist, very specific American views that you're getting there on TikTok and from CBS now. And so I think, yeah, it's just part of an overall consolidation of the same figures that are benefiting from our war on Venezuela. And I can get into that.
There was a fascinating clip on CNN where Brian Stelter was talking about this. He was like the expert brought on to talk about the TikTok, and he manages to do it without mentioning anything about Israel or the kind of suppression of pro-Palestine views.
TikTok's new American business is off to a really inauspicious start, and the app is on the fritz. It's been on the fritz for days, with users reporting different sorts of problems. And as you said, TikTok is blaming this on a data center outage, but some users just are not buying it. The context here is key. Last week, TikTok's U.S. entity changed hands. This was a result of a long gestating deal between TikTok and the Trump administration, trying to resolve concerns over national security. The new TikTok U.S. business is controlled by American investors who are allied and aligned with President Trump. These are figures like Larry Ellison, the Oracle billionaire, and Michael Dell. These are figures who are now controlling TikTok's U.S. entity, and there are lots of questions about whether this joint venture is going to put the thumb on the scale to benefit President Trump, to benefit the MAGA right, in some of the same ways that Elon Musk moved Twitter to the right.
Even though, I don't know how many people from Jonathan Greenblatt to Democratic officials during the Biden administration who openly said that the reason for the TikTok ban was that pro-Palestine speech was getting too much of an airing. And there was a recent...
Tony Blinken said it.
Yeah, 100%. There was a recent clip that was going viral also of the TikTok CEO saying as much.
We made a change to designate the use of the term Zionist as a proxy for a protected attribute as hate speech. So if somebody were to use Zionist, of course you can use it in the sense of you're a proud Zionist, but if you're using it in the context of degrading somebody, calling somebody a Zionist as a dirty name, then that gets designated as hate speech to be moderated against. Over the course of 2024, we tripled the amount of accounts that we were banning for hateful activity. We also have, I think, over 24 Jewish organizations that are constantly feeding us intelligence and information when they spot violative trends. There is no finish line. There's no finish line to moderating hate speech, identifying hateful trends, trying to keep the platform safe. There's no such thing as an end game.
Just saying the quiet part out loud.
Yeah. Like you said, there were many Biden administration officials, including the Secretary of State, who made it clear why they were going after TikTok. And now they have their way. They got their way with CBS as well.
Okay. So, Anya, you made a really important point when we were talking about immigration a second ago, that the root cause of so much immigration is, in fact, American imperialism. Before this latest round of news stories in ICE escalations, killings in the street, we were very focused, rightly so, on the fact that the United States of America dropped in and literally kidnapped the president of Venezuela. And miraculously, that, along with the Epstein news story, has basically disappeared from headlines. That's a mistake, and I think it's very important for you to be here and and to update us on what's been going on.
Well, the one bright side of some of this might be that for all of the criminality that we can discuss when it came to the operation and the attack on Venezuela on January 3rd that led to the kidnapping of the president, and now Maduro is facing drug trafficking charges in the United States, the one upside I will say is that there might be in the future in Venezuela a temporary or prolonged increase in the quality of life and less migration, because there appears to be a normalization process taking place now between the current Venezuelan government, which is still Chavista. That's the point that I want to make here, is regime change did not necessarily occur. This was not a regime change war. It removed the head of the state. But Maduro's vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, is now the president of Venezuela as the constitution would dictate. So there was no collapse of the regime. And Trump made this very clear when he said that they made the choice not to go in and take everybody out the way they did in Iraq, because that would have led to state collapse. This, in a way, is an admission of U.S. policy that regime change in Venezuela has failed for 2 decades now. And basically, the removal of Maduro in many ways was more about saving face and giving the appearance that Trump had succeeded in achieving his goal of regime change. He was very fixated on the issue of Maduro himself, because he'd been trying to get Maduro dislodged since his last term. And instead of just agreeing to shake Maduro's hand and reach this agreement that now the Venezuelan government under Delcy Rodriguez and Trump have come to, which is exactly the plan essentially that Maduro agreed to before he was removed, they just had to get him out of the picture to make Trump feel good and to make Marco Rubio and the U.S. government be able to say that they had a win. Because...
So, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead, because I'm just rambling at this point.
Well, no, not at all. I mean, I'm curious, what is the specific grievance between Trump and Maduro if it wasn't about substantive regime change, if Maduro was willing to agree to the same, terms that his vice president has now submitted to?
As I said, I think for the administration at this point, it was personal, because Maduro, it just became, they personalized the issue to say that they have a victory. I think and it's ridiculous, because Trump could have been a man and gone to Caracas or invited Maduro to Washington, and they could have shaken hands and started trading and opening up the oil industry, as is now happening in Venezuela, without any of this going on. But then maybe it wouldn't have looked like a big rah-rah U.S. victory. It would have looked like a Maduro victory. It would have looked like Maduro won and he'd withstood the U.S. pressure. I think they really needed something to say, look, we have a scalp. But in reality, they're working with the government, and the government will never know whether Maduro was going to change the hydrocarbons law, for example, the way that the National Assembly in Venezuela now have, to allow more private access. But there was already enough reported in mainstream U.S. media about what Maduro was willing to concede to suggest that these kinds of deals would have been possible even without the overt regime change. So in a way, the biggest loser, other than Maduro himself and his wife, who are now in a U.S. prison of this operation, is Maria Corina Machado and the extremist Venezuelan opposition that she represents, because they expected to be the figures that Trump installed. But Trump and his administration decided that that was too much of a risk, that then there could have been a collapse and civil strife, civil unrest. There are characters in Venezuela, Diosdado Cabello being the primary figure. He's the interior minister, but he's also lives on there, continues the legacy of Chavez through his weekly show, where he goes on for 3 hours and kind of does these rants about politics. He's very popular in the country. He has control basically over the colectivos, the armed groups that are independent of the government in Venezuela, and he's very close to the military and comes from the military. And so Delcy herself, while she and her brother are very powerful in Venezuela and controlled many aspects of the government, from the oil ministry to the economy ministry, if they completely betrayed the revolution, or if that was really what was playing out here, there would be a reaction from the military, from this other wing of the Chavista movement, I think, to toss them out. Or if they had removed Chavismo altogether and tried to install Maria Corina Machado, then you would see the streets activated and you could see a civil war scenario play out in Venezuela, or guerrilla warfare. And that's when you would have to see U.S. troops on the ground to actually secure the oil. So the Trump administration decided, well, we can secure the oil by just cutting a deal with the government. And so the radical opposition now is basically been hung up to dry. And because Delcy will be overseeing now the opening up of the economy, the lifting of some sanctions in Venezuela, she's going to benefit. The society will benefit as a result of the fact that these sanctions are lifted and that money is coming in. And she'll probably be able to win elections if and when they're held. So in a way, Chavismo has evolved into something new, and it's changed. It's made actual legal changes to the laws that used to defend its complete sovereign control of their natural resources. But Chavismo remains in power, and you had Jorge Rodriguez, Delcy's brother, who's the information minister and speaker of the National Assembly, a very powerful figure himself, say recently, basically quoting Deng Xiaoping in China, that the quote was, "It doesn't matter the color of the cat as long as it catches mice." This was a quote that Deng used when he was opening up China, basically making reforms of the Communist Party to allow Western and international investment, saying, we can be purists when it comes to our laws and our socialism or our communism as they define it, but maybe it's more important to keep the cat alive and change the rules a little bit in order to survive. It's a debate that they're going to have within Venezuela now, but it does kind of reveal in some ways, the success of U.S. policy. The fact that they went in there and on its face, it was, if you're just coming from a raw U.S. perspective, a very successful operation. They got their guy. No U.S. service people were killed, and people in Venezuela and around the world, I think, have questions about how that was possible. But on the other hand, it is an admission that U.S. policy of regime change, hard regime change in Venezuela that they've been trying to do for over 20 years failed.
I mean, certainly people are asking questions, including about what is left of international law after all of this. As we're recording, there are Senate hearings happening right now at which Marco Rubio is testifying about Venezuela. Let's play a clip of an exchange that's going viral presently between Rand Paul and Marco Rubio and get your response.
So I would ask you, if a foreign country bombed our air defense missiles, captured and removed our president, and blockaded our country, would that be considered an act of war?
Well, I think your question is about and I will acknowledge you've been very consistent on all these points the entire career. So let me. No matter who's in charge. So I will point to two things. The first is it's hard for us to conceive that an operation that lasted about 4.5 hours and was a law enforcement operation to capture someone we don't recognize as a head of state, indicted in the United States, wanted with a $50 million bounty.
My question would be, if it only took 4 hours to take our president, it's very short, nobody dies on the other side, nobody dies on our side, it's perfect. Would it be an act of war?
We just don't believe that this operation comes anywhere close to the constitutional definition of war.
But would it be an act of war if someone did it to us? Nobody dies, few casualties, they're in and out. Boom, it's a perfect military operation. Would that be an act of war? Of course it would be an act of war.
I mean, what do you even do with that?
Marco Rubio, he really has defined himself, I think, as the most prominent public figure of the Trump administration. I think this is his legacy, and that he'll definitely try to turn it into a presidential run. And in some ways, he's really delivering to his base. I mean, he's saying, we got Maduro, next we're going for Cuba. This is what the radical Latinos in Florida have been voting for him to carry. This is a policy they've been asking for him to carry out since he invented his career and said that he was a victim of communism when in fact his family fled the US-backed Batista regime. I mean, he's a complete phony, but I get lost on a tangent of Rubio, also considering the fact that his major donor, Paul Singer, Zionist billionaire, one of the top donors to the Republican and Democratic Party, he'll play whichever side matters to him. He funded the initial Steele dossier and investigation into Trump to frame him for Russiagate, but now he's one of Trump's main backers and is one of Rubio's main backers, and he's the one benefiting from this long-term strategy of collapsing Venezuela's economy and looting its assets. Because you might remember, we've discussed previously on this show, and one of the main themes of my book, which was how through the U.S. the attempted coup against Maduro in 2019, when the U.S. recognized the shadow government and seized all of Venezuela's assets, that the main treasure they took away from this campaign of piracy was Citgo Petroleum, which is a gas station. You might know it as a gas station in the United States, but it's also oil refineries and oil pipelines that were actually a subsidiary of the Venezuelan state oil company PDVSA. So they seized all this company in order to pay back various creditors that had been suing the Venezuelan government. And there's so much drama there that I get into the book that exposes the corruption of the Guaido government and the Trump government. But the main point that I want to make is the outcome of all of this corruption is now that Paul Singer, this Zionist billionaire, is buying all of Citgo. He is the one benefiting from that policy because in my book, we didn't know who was going to actually walk away with the company. It was being put up for auction in the courts in order to satisfy, like I said, all these legal claims that had been filed against the Venezuelan government by creditors here in the United States. But now, in the last year, it's revealed that Paul Singer is coming in to purchase this company and basically become more powerful. He's like the original vulture capitalist hedge funder. He owned Argentina's debt. You might remember all the crises surrounding the Argentine currency and their economy a few years ago. He was at the center of that because he was calling in all his loans that he'd given to the Argentine government. He's a international criminal, and yeah, he will fund Rubio's campaign when he runs for president in order for Rubio to continue these policies. And Rubio's promising to bring them to Cuba by the end of the year.
Yeah, I did see a clip going around of Donald Trump basically saying Cuba's next. Did you see that one?
I saw at least some media reports. I forget which magazine it was in, but them openly, declaring that Cuba would be next.
Here we go. I just put it in the chat because I really do need help making sense of some of this because it feels, and I don't mean this in a way, I'm going to use the words conspiratorial. I don't mean that in an untrue way. I mean it it feels like there are all of these pieces and coincidences and echoes of things throughout all these news stories that I am struggling to weave into a thread that can be understood as something a little bit more concrete and directional, and therefore can be pushed back against and fought. So here's the clip that I saw and don't know how to piece together in all of this.
Well, we're going to see what happens with Cuba. I don't know. Anybody interested in Cuba in this room? Not too many people. This is not a Cuba room, but that's all right. There are plenty of them around, especially in Miami. And Cuba will be failing pretty soon. Cuba is really a nation that's very close to failing. They got their money from Venezuela. They got the oil from Venezuela. They're not getting that anymore.
We were talking about the polls earlier. Clearly, you're...
Yeah, so Venezuela has supplied Cuba and many other countries in the region with oil. For a while, Haiti was doing much better than it currently is doing because Venezuela was providing it with oil. But over the years, sanctions have made that more and more difficult. And since this latest situation with Venezuela, where they removed Maduro, they are trying to pressure Venezuela to cut Cuba off entirely. Mexico has stepped in and is supplying Cuba with some oil. But I mean, the reality is the situation in Cuba is not good. It hasn't been for a long time. I mean, the sanctions are designed to keep that country under siege and under blockade. And so at this point, we live in a situation where, a lot of people have come to Miami and are basically sustaining the country with remittances, and now the U.S. government's sitting back just hoping that the situation gets so bad that it will fall. I'm sure that they will attempt to stimulate some sort of USAID-backed protest movement in Cuba in the next year. I wouldn't be shocked if we saw that. I don't know whether the government, what position the government is in to withstand that. I haven't spent as much time, or I haven't spent any time in Cuba where I have with Venezuela, and so I know the country much better. But based on what I do know about Cuba, it's not a country that is independently wealthy and could fall back on anything the way that Venezuela at least can with its oil revenue.
Yeah, I mean, the way Donald Trump is talking about it there. I mean, I understand there's a broader sort of domino theory, we got to fight communism everywhere, kind of antagonism about Cuba that's existed since time immemorial. But the way he's talking about it in that clip, it feels as though the interest is almost purely electoral. He says, I know this isn't a Cuba room. This isn't the room. He's for listeners, he's standing in a room with looks like a bunch of white Americans somewhere in the north where you need a heavy coat. But this isn't a Cuba room, but there's
probably
Cuba rooms elsewhere. Oh, maybe it was. But there are Cuba rooms elsewhere where the fact of us tightening the grip on Cuba and further immiserating Cuba through sanctions and withholding the oil, the limited resources they were able to get through a country like Venezuela, will help us electorally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean the Miami. I was just traveling through Miami a few days ago, and yeah, the scene there. It's a lot of very, very passionate Latinos that would like to overthrow the Cuban government and the Venezuelan government. That's what you got. And then you also have heavy Zionist presence, heavy Zionist Israeli presence all over Miami. And if Cuba falls, those are the forces that will be in there investing and getting their money, pumping their money into the country and pumping the wealth out.
Why does it feel like everything is, Zionism? This is the bit that I want the connectivity established. What is going on? I mean, I didn't even bring this up. There was also the news story about Zionists setting fires in Patagonia.
Yeah.
Ostensibly, the reasoning was that the laws had been changed so that if there had been after a wildfire, the land was for sale for relatively cheaply, and this was kind of framed as a way for Israelis to have a land grab. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Just before these wildfires in Patagonia, which is precious land in Argentina, started, Argentina under Javier Milei, who was raised Catholic but has renounced his Catholicism to become Jewish and is very close to the Chabad Lubavitch cult, which Jared Kushner is a member of as well. He changed the law. His government changed the law in Argentina so that if land is not supposed to be in Patagonia transferred to foreigners. You cannot sell land to foreigners, except now, since you changed the law, unless it was affected by a wildfire or fires. So if land is burned, it can be sold now to foreigners. And Israelis have been trying to buy this land for a long time. There are like complaints. Local Argentines complain openly on the media. They say the Israelis have been here offering us land, money for this land forever, and we don't want to give it to them. But there's also an explicit plan, the Andina plan, which that for years Zionists tried to deny was real and just said it was a conspiracy theory, but is actually a plan for basically the same group that established Israel to establish a Jewish state in Argentina in that land. And in fact, Theodore Herzl wrote in his own words when he was debating where to put the Jewish state, whether to put it in Argentina or in Israel or Palestine. And so you have this scenario now where since the start of the year, the last I saw a week ago or a week or two ago, was like 8 Israelis had been arrested for starting wildfires. Basically,
this isn't a conspiracy. Like when I first saw the headline, I'm like, oh no, like let me be careful, because what one Zionists love to do, they'll put like a I shouldn't say they like to do it. I've seen it happen.
They do.
That they'll put a really outrageous story out there and wait for people to retweet it, and then it'll be false, and they'll be like, oh, you just want to promulgate any anti-Semitism. So I'll be looking, if something feels especially kind of crazy, I'll be like, let me just give this a beat and see if it's reported out at all. But this isn't conspiratorial. This is a real thing that's happening.
Yeah, it started with just Argentines saying to the media, it's the Israelis, it's the Zionists. And then the Chilean government actually said that they've arrested multiple Israeli nationals. And the thing is, every Israeli national is an agent of the Israeli military. They all have to serve in some way. So you don't know if you're dealing with a soldier, if you're dealing with someone who does work for intelligence when they're walking in the woods and lighting a cigarette. By the way, they're catching them sometimes walking around with a lit cigarette, which you're not allowed to do. Don't you remember growing up the basic, like, don't start a fire, one match can light it down? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Cigarettes are one of the leading causes of wildfire. So for anybody who wants to say, oh, they were just arrested for lighting a cigarette, that is how you start wildfires with the right conditions. And then when you see that the way that the fires, like, just look at a map, they're available online, starting in all these random positions in Patagonia. It's just when you also then add the fact that they want this land, it's pretty disturbing. And what's really dark, I mean, if you want to get really dark, in my opinion, is that if you have this scenario playing out in Palestine where the craziest sect of Israelis want to bomb the Temple Mount, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, right? That's what started all this to begin with. Operation on October 7th, Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, was Hamas's response to the fact that Israel had been carrying out aggressions against the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest site in all of Islam that is in Jerusalem, which the Israelis would like to bomb and establish their temple in order to bring about their God in the end times. I mean, those are actually people in the Israeli government want to do that. And that would be a huge provocation to the region. It would, it could lead to the end of the world. You would have every Muslim in the world would be outraged. All of those countries in the region would not tolerate, I think, that Israeli action. And so then why does suddenly Patagonia become interesting? Well, if you were going to live through a nuclear holocaust, that's probably the best place in the world to be because you're the furthest out. You're close to Antarctica, pretty much. That's where you get on a boat and cross the Drake Passage if you want to go on a cruise to Antarctica. Patagonia is way out there. It's the end of the earth. So it's interesting that the same people who want to bring about the end times in Palestine want to claim the land that is furthest away from all of humanity. It's kind of, in my opinion, kind of a disturbing dynamic we have at play.
I don't, when I open this, I'm sorry, for listeners, I fully made Anya into my therapist for 30 minutes before we started recording because I was just kvetching about how overwhelming the media cycle is and how frankly disturbing it is that, again, like I'm very conscious of various tropes that I don't want to fall into, but how much Zionist overreach, imperialism, lack of respect for the environment. I'm thinking now about another story about who's the family that owns all the almond farms out in California that are using all the water. I did an episode about it last year.
It's on the tomato. They also have palm juice, the pomegranates. It starts with an R. Resnick.
Resnicks, exactly.
The Resnick family. Yeah, they brought all the they're like responsible for pomegranate importation to the United States too.
Yes, and also
pistachios.
Yeah. Okay, so they're all of these stories. I'm not
Larry Ellison.
Larry Ellison, the TikTok stuff, the Epstein stuff, the Patagonia stuff. It was just Holocaust Remembrance Day, which the reporter Jasper Nathaniel, who was recently on the show, pointed out that settlers spent Holocaust Remembrance Day doing Kristallnacht in the West Bank, lighting fires, terrorizing families. Like, it is overwhelming, not just because of the number of the stories, but the feeling that there's something related in the way that the world is crumbling.
Yeah, well, let's look at Trump's attempt to take over Greenland, which I think it was the Wall Street Journal did a whole, or maybe it was the Guardian, a mainstream Western journal did a whole report about how Ron Lauder is the architect of Trump's takeover of Greenland. He's the one who asked him to. This is of the Estee Lauder family, the guy who who's responsible basically for giving. I know. I'm with you. But is there any ethical makeup? I mean,
I mean, Huda Beauty, I think, at least is pro-Palestine.
Oh.
But like, I stopped buying my foundation after October 7th. I had, some left that lasted me for a long time. I switched away for a while and was looking so beat that I do confess that I bought one more bottle, which I'm in the middle of now. But now, then this news came out and I'm like, this is what I get. Like, I can't justify this. So I'm taking recommendations for foundations that don't cause breakouts, which have a lot of color ranges.
I like
help me out.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm really bad with makeup personally. I just like my tinted SPF. But Ron Lauder not only responsible for the Greenland policy, but is also getting the main mining rights to Ukraine now that we've destroyed that country. So it's just like, it's just, you can just let the stories speak for themselves. You don't really have to say much.
Yeah, the part of the reason why I wanted to play that clip from the TikTok CEO earlier is that, I mean, there's this way in which, these clips are going where people are saying, well, it's not that we own the media, but it's really important that we own the media. It's not that, they're saying the trope, the anti-Semitic trope out loud, right as they do the thing that they say that if you acknowledge is in fact the trope, right? And by they, I want to be clear, I'm meaning Zionists, not Jewish people. Zionists.
It's always a certain group of,
And in particular, a narrow group of very affluent Zionists who, I've said this before. I think I just did an episode with Gabor Mate where he was talking about how he feels like this is the darkest time he's ever experienced in his life. And this is a Holocaust survivor saying it, right? And it feels like it's particularly dark because of the way things feel like they're being done very openly in a way that you don't care about political consequences because it feels like in-game stuff.
Yeah, because it's like, they feel like that we don't even have the ability to resist them if we want to. So why should they even hide it at this point? That's I agree. That is how it feels.
I mean, do you think that that's right?
Well, they have capture of both parties. So I think it would be great. I think it would be awesome to have a third party person. But then that's why we're back at the conversation we had at the beginning of the show. It would be great to unite people around overthrowing this two-party duopoly that are controlled by Zionist interests and just making it about that. Because, then we can talk about many things, freedom of speech, our disastrous foreign policy that all come back to this issue. But I think it would be hard to unite all of those people when it comes to issues like immigration. So it becomes challenging.
Do you think that if there's like a voter, let's say a Trump voter in the Bronx or Michigan or Western Pennsylvania, pick a state, pick a place, but place that Democrats can win and need to win. Not that I'm rooting for Democrats, but do you really think if there was a Democratic platform that said we are literally going to tax the rich, we're literally going to stop funding Israel point blank period, we are going to take this huge ICE budget increase that is funded in part by cutting your healthcare, your Obamacare. And we don't really care about Obamacare, but we're actually going to universal healthcare and use our tax dollars for that. That we're going to raise the minimum wage to $25 an hour where it needs to be. That isn't enough to, and we're going to cancel, student debt, which people are now even more on board with because of the way that the Trump administration has been completely, cocking up people's repayment plans. People who already had, guaranteed income-based repayment and things like that being thrown under the bus. You really think that if Democrats' position was also, and we're going to address the root cause of undocumented immigration by lifting sanctions on Venezuela and other parts of the world and helping to create political and economic stability in those places instead of the opposite, that wouldn't work unless we also said, no, we have to fund ICE and border control and keep rounding people up.
I mean, in that scenario In that fantasy scenario, it's possible.
Yes, it is a fantasy.
but
Completely agree.
I don't think that we would ever have anybody say that. I do think that those are the cultural issues that make it harder to just have a one issue. We're going after foreign wars and spending and all that. That bridging then those cultural divides become difficult.
So I agree that it's a fantasy, and I agree that these cultural issues get to be polarizing because they're intentionally polarizing, because both parties know that they don't want to do any of the things that I just enumerated, and that they'd rather fight a battle about, trans girls in sports or immigration and whatever. You can think those issues are real or fake, but they become the core issues and the core priorities of American voters very purposefully because of
people that have kids in schools are going to be dealing with that stuff probably more than they're dealing with Israel.
Are they? Are there?
Yeah. I think so. I think if you're sending kids to school.
Do you remember that case in Oregon where they were outlawing, there was a law to ban participation of trans kids. It's always girls, trans girls in a girls like soccer team in high schools or middle or elementary, undergrad, like primary school kids. Mm-hmm. And it ended up getting thrown out, not because like the people in, it was like Oregon or Utah, maybe Utah. It was a conservative state. It ended up getting thrown out not because of the Bleeding Heart Lives, but it turned out that there was one trans kid in the whole state, and the law was basically targeting like one 10-year-old in the whole state. I mean, it compared to childcare costs.
It is. I mean, yeah, but it's something that people are going to be dealing with that more. They are dealing with it. I mean, basically,
than their healthcare costs.
Parents and they are dealing with both.
Well, that's the thing. So the question is, can Republicans manage to win on one of those issues, completely throwing people's childcare needs, housing costs, healthcare costs under the bus? And we're supposed to believe that an imaginary left Democratic candidate can't win on healthcare costs, blah, 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 all those other things, while basically ignoring and not from a policy perspective leaning into those issues. I mean, look, Zoran is the example. He did absolutely nothing to throw any marginalized community under the bus. He'll sit there and do TikToks in the park with, trans content creators and because it's all beside the point. His agenda is his agenda. Well,
he's running New York. I don't think New York is the country. I don't. Personally, I don't.
The whole point of Zoran was that he was able to get back a significant number of Trump voters in New York. And that he based his whole campaign off of asking those voters what their priorities were.
I'm sure that they will run someone like him. I'm sure that they will run. I'm sure that AOC and Ro Khanna will emulate his run, and they will probably Ro Khanna first. I think
because let's talk about AOC for a second. I mean, I agree that they're going to maybe run. I think Ro Khanna has been angling for it for a long time.
Yeah.
But the question I have is how much they're actually going to emulate Zoran. Because we've already seen, or at least who Zoran was when he was running. I have some questions about how he is now. He's been criticized in the context of this recent ICE escalation over having said during his campaign that he was going to end the NYPD's SRG department. It was one of the, the departments that was cracking down on Palestinian advocates, pro-Palestine advocates in particular. And they were just involved in an action against protesters in New York last night or the night before.
He kept Israel in charge of the NYPD.
Yeah, Jessica Tisch. Yeah, we have a lot of big Zoran question marks, and that's fine and fair. But the idea of Zoran, the Zoran like pre-primary win, how much are they even going to be willing to match that? Because AOC's been getting a lot of heat for basically running cover for Democratic Party leadership. I don't know if you've caught any of this online. AOC obviously was one of the people who very much popularized defund ICE as a slogan when she was running for president. But as the Democratic leadership, New York-based leadership, has declined to go as far as to say that they're abolishing ICE, AOC keeps coming out with these statements saying, well, overwhelmingly, there was obviously this vote where 7 Democrats crossed the line for this ICE funding. And she has gone over the way and said, well, most Democrats didn't vote for it, right? And Democratic leadership is doing all they can do. I want to find the exact quotes because I don't want to misrepresent AOC and be unfair to her. So, for example, Ken Klippenstein tweeted out on January 24th, very cool that Congress just renewed ICE's budget with absolutely zero concessions. AOC responded to him saying, this is incorrect. Congress has not yet renewed ICE's budget. House voted, but Senate hasn't yet. They need 10 Democratic votes in the Senate. We can still stop it. So she is basically using a technicality in a world where we all understand how the rotating villain theory works and the likelihood of what the House vote pretends for the vote in the Senate to sort of run cover for the majority of the Democratic caucus, even though from the perspective of someone I imagine like Ken and myself, it is no accident that Republicans always magically seem to get the exact number of Democrats crossing the aisle to pass a quote unquote conservative agenda, which is in fact just the duopoly's corporate agenda, right? So she's been getting a lot of flack from people who frankly hated my guts for criticizing her 4 years ago over forced to vote and other kinds of things.
Right. Well, I think it goes back to this issue where I said, is New York the country or not? I think in some ways for Rokan and AOC to have a run, they will have to emulate themselves off of Zoran to a degree because they have to offer something different than the mainstream Democrats. They have to play to being part of this new wave that Zoran is a part of saying, hey, look, no, we are ultra progressive. They need to play that role to a degree, but they also know that they have to temper their more what you would think are radical or progressive positions because they have to play to the full country if they're running for president. And so when you see AOC making apology for those kinds of Democrats, those Democrats are voting that way, not just because it's like they're in a back room, the Democrats and the Republicans are sitting around and saying, okay, which 5 of you are going to vote with us this time? It's those Democrats are voting that way because they represent more conservative districts. They represent real people that probably wanted them to vote that way. Otherwise, they're going to lose their positions.
Do you think that that's really true? Because,
yeah,
so for example,
why else would they, do you think that it's random, the Democrats that vote that way? It's because
I think the Democratic Party supports ICE. And I think that because under Obama, he maintained and grew ICE.
They do. I'm not debating that.
Yeah. I don't think it's that. I do not think because.
But why do they support ICE?
I got to pull up. Why do Democrats generally support ICE? Why do both?
Some of those more conservative Democrats, those conservative Democrats that vote that way, might be representing districts that are just more conservative. Because I think there are more Democratic representatives that come from conservative bases. For example, you don't have Republicans that are in office that are like representing slightly liberal bases and are voting against their party in the same way that Democrats are. But there's always this section of the Democratic Party that's more conservative because that's what their base also is.
Okay, so the 7 Democrats that crossed the line are Marie Guzman-Perez, who
she would be in a swing district. She could have lost easily to a Republican. That's why.
Well, from Washington's 3rd district. Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. What were you going to say?
She almost lost to a Republican who's now in the Trump administration. So if she didn't vote for that immigration policy, would lose her seat to a pro.
But come on, Anya. These are 7 Democrats. There are way more than 7 Democrats in the House that are in swing districts. If it's just about swing districts,
she was like in the most ultimate. She's in one of the most ultimate swing districts in the state or in the country.
I see a lot more consistency with. When I see MGP, I see someone who the New York Times has been constantly trying to push as a leader of the Democratic Party, as a sort of counterpoint, as a youngish, woman against someone like AOC, who they anticipate will run, if not this round, the next time around, and trying to establish her as a blue dog moderate who is trying to show her blue dog moderate bona fides. But it's like, do you think the tail is wagging the dog or the dog is really wagging the tail? Democrats love to find someone in a swing district and then put them forward as evidence. The fact that they have won in a swing district is evidence of the fact that they can win big nationally. And it validates our moderate policies as the path forward for Democrats. And I think that that's what's leading the charge. They are cherry picking people like her and saying, we are going to use you to make the case that this is who we all have to be as a party if we want to win, as opposed to looking at polls that show that ICE is unpopular and increasingly unpopular, that the overwhelming majority of Democrats obviously don't feel like this is a big concern for them, having voted against this budget. And also we can go every single one of these people, Jared Golden, the co-chair of the Blue Dog Coalition. Like, these are the people. I am skeptical that this is about electoral consequences, especially given the temperature of the country right now, and more about the Democratic Party trying to play this game where they are in fact deeply conservative and basically ideologically in line on all members of corporate all economic issues with the Republicans, but have to put forward a veneer of caring about the things that polls suggest Americans care about, including abolishing ICE or at least reining them in dramatically.
I think that, the Blue Dog Democrats represent a very specific kind of Democrat, and she, MGP, is that what people are calling her now? I didn't know that she'd been granted the triple name, whatever, initial status yet.
Ezra Klein's
she's
trying
so
his best.
unlikable. She's just cringe. But she's also a major imperialist too. She's not somebody. If they try to push her on the national stage, that would be nuts.
But they've been trying.
If this is just about the party and not just about them, I know that they are, and I've seen all of her national the profiles and all that. But I would just be shocked if they ran her because she really is not charismatic at all and just struggles to speak. But if this is not about electoral politics to some degree, and these aren't just Democrats answering to their bases, and Democrats feel so strongly about immigration, then some of those Democrats that voted with Republicans should lose their seats. Because if this is such a hot issue and this is what's really animating the public, but I don't think they will.
Because most elections aren't won and lost on a single issue, right? So
except for immigration, immigration kind of is one that in the last election was the deciding factor.
Well, and I think a lot of Republicans, and depending maybe even these Democrats, are also going to lose on the basis of their votes on this, because people don't like this. People don't like what ICE is doing, including conservatives.
Exactly, but you might be in a rural Washington state district that could send a Democrat as long as they played on the immigration issue. Otherwise, they would vote for a Republican. Is what I'm saying. I do think those districts still exist.
When I look at Henry Cuellar, who's also on this list, Henry Cuellar is a Texas representative who was backed by Nancy Pelosi the year that Roe was overturned, who didn't support abortion. Right?
Yeah.
Who was running against a young, promising, who was very competitive, given that she was a full lefty DSA style candidate in their district, and he got the backing of the Democratic Party literally months after Roe was overturned, right? And he's on this list. I don't think this is an accident. I think there are people who the party says, I'm going to back you, Texas, and you're our guy when it's time to pull the trigger and do the unpopular thing. Like the squad members even periodically taking these votes to fund the Iron Dome, right? Do we think that AOC famously was made to cry on the House floor by Nancy Pelosi after her iron vote abstention because she secretly really wanted to vote for Israel, or she felt like it would imperil her?
I think she's one. I think she's one of the most cynical people currently in Congress. I think she wants to be president, and that she will do anything to get there. That's what I think about her.
So we're back to this thing, and the point. I'll step away from the specifics of this for a second. I've been thinking a lot about my interview with Gabor Mate, and I've been thinking about what it means to be sort of politically dispirited or overwhelmed. And I've been thinking about how often this might be a radar. I've been thinking about how often when leftists say that they are disaffected and want to withdraw from the two-party system, the cudgel that Democrats will use is to say, well, you can't sit this one out. This was Bernie Sanders, people like him say, when their own supporters express discontent with the way that they've bent the knee of the Democratic Party or sheep-herded people back toward Biden or whatever it is. They say, well, you don't get to sit this out. When leftists express frustration with the two-party system that is characterized as inaction, when that's not it at all. It's them making a decision to funnel their energy into something else that might be more productive, whether it's a third party, whether it's local politics, whether it's mutual aid, et cetera. And I've been thinking a lot about why that there's like a propagandistic aspect of resisting despair. And that there's an argument that much like in addiction work, you got to hit rock bottom before you're willing to change. And I've been thinking about why I have a compulsion to constantly talk about all the reasons why the Democratic Party is not a resistance party, that they're not going to save you, why they are complicit in everything that Republicans are doing. And it's because I think on some level, my instinct is that you have to hit rock bottom. You have to be despairing about the ability to reform the system if you're going to be willing to commit your energies into the things that actually will work. So it's not despair leads to an action. It's quite the opposite. It's despair leads to more productive action. And the reason why Democrats, establishment Democrats, are constantly inveighing against the left, not to, quote, sit this one out and not to have despair and to have hope, the audacity of hope, is because they want you to keep hoping that something can be done in their system that they know is rigged.
Yeah, totally. I agree 100%.
And that there's a way that we need to get to despair faster.
Yeah, that's why I've stuck to journalism, because I feel like I can just cover the despair and talk about it, where if I were too involved in politics directly, I would not be able to tolerate it, because I can't deal with all of that back and forth drama. I think just talk about the despair. The more it spreads, the more people know the truth. The more Americans know, the closer we can get to changing things. Yes, that's how I feel. That's why politics freaks me out.
Look, I appreciate that. And I really appreciate all the reporting you do. And I apologize for dragging you into my existential crisis.
No, it's totally fine.
I'm going to let you go. Before I do, can you tell people where they can find more? Oh, well, first of all, I don't want to cut you off. Is there anything that we didn't get to that you think people should know about what's happening in Venezuela?
No, I mean, just keep your eyes peeled, because now we're kind of in this period where Trump is playing ball with the government there. And so it'll just be interesting to see how it plays out. And I hope that it leads to an improving of the situation there, is all I can say. You know, it's unfortunate that it came to this. And then keep an eye out for Maduro's trial. Max, my husband, Max Blumenthal, did a great breakdown of why the indictment against him is complete baloney. And you can find that on the Gray Zone. That's where you can find my work. I'm less active these days because I'm focused on my kids, but I also post on X occasionally, and sometimes I'm hitting the podcast circuit. So thank you for having me, Brianna.
It's always a pleasure. Congratulations. I've talked to Max, but not you, since your latest was born. So congratulations on the baby.
Thank you.
And I really appreciate the time you were willing to spend with us today. Go check out Anya at the Gray Zone on the internet and beyond. Check out her book, Corporate Coup. You can find it wherever you get books.
Yeah, well, you can go to my publisher, OR Books, because then you don't have to give your money to Amazon, even though I don't mind getting my listing boosted there. If you accidentally go to Amazon, I prefer that you buy it from my publisher.
Fantastic. Anya, thanks again for spending the time. Thanks to all of you for tuning into this episode of Bad Faith Podcast. You know, you can get an additional episode of Bad Faith every month by subscribing at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. This Monday's episode with Gabor Mate seems to be received extremely well. And so if you're on the fence thinking about whether or not you want to subscribe, this is an excellent moment to do so. As always, take care of yourselves and remember to keep the faith, even though maybe the tipping point is us getting to the bottomless pit of despair. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye. Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.